Welcome back after lunch. Now I'm going to hand over to Raimund from GitLab to talk about TeamOps. Thank you.
Thanks, Roger. So before I delve into this, I'm going to just start with a couple of interactivity things. We've all had lunch. We're all feeling a little bit sleepy now. Stomachs are full. So let's get you moving. Who here has heard of DevOps? Okay. Who here has heard of DevSecOps? Any ops? A couple. TeamOps. All right. So we're not going to talk tech now. We've had tech all morning. We had tech all yesterday. Let's talk people and process. Yay! Everybody loves a bit of people and process. Anyway, hi, I'm Raimund, and I'm from GitLab, and I'm going to just have a little chat about TeamOps. So pretty much, what is TeamOps? Okay, TeamOps is a distilled way of how we at GitLab work, pretty much. So GitLab is well known and famous for being a remote-only company. We came to sort of prominence when the whole pandemic hit, and suddenly the world was like, hey, we need to start working from home, and we were like, yeah. So, anyway, so the success of us being remote-only, remote-first, isn't based on because we are remote-only, remote-first, but it's also the way we work, the operational model. TeamOps is a way of us distilling that and shifting the focus from where people work to how people work. And that's really bringing that focus away from going to work to do something, or just making sure that the work is produced by people, not by someone, by some equipment or something. So productivity is always best when your teams are empowered and equipped to work well together, wherever that may be. So in a modern workplace, there's a number of things that we can start to bring into this, okay? And we want to really, TeamOps is all about optimizing the productivity, the flexibility, and the autonomy in the team dynamics, and making sure that the teams can work and are empowered to work appropriately, and the way that actually helps them produce the best value. So, all right, we're talking TeamOps. What is this thing? Okay, so let's break it down. There's four main pieces of TeamOps, right? The first one is a shared reality. Now, what is a shared reality? It means that everybody has the same single source of truth to work off. In our case, that means we've got a GitLab handbook. All of our processes, all of our procedures, everything is there. It's all available for anyone to work from. It's available for anyone to update, and indeed, anyone can update that. It's also open source, and it's fully available online for even yourselves to browse. Secondly, equal contributions, right? By having that single source of truth and that shared context in a place where anyone can contribute to it, whether they're a junior that's just started last week updating the CEO's README because he found some spelling mistakes, or it's a senior manager changing a small piece of a workflow somewhere in the thing, everyone's working out of that same piece, that same context, everyone's working out of that same source of truth, and as a result, everybody's contributions are similarly equal. Enabling decisions to be made at the right levels within the organization helps foster decision velocity. And decision velocity helps us by making sure that the decisions where they need to be made are then pushed out, so we're not waiting for long decision chains to be made, and everyone, especially in large organizations, has probably dealt with waiting for somebody to make a decision on something. So empowering the right people at the right levels within the teams helps speed that up. And then lastly, anything you do needs some level of measurement. There's no good going and making a change, because then you've got no way of knowing whether that was helpful or hindering. Okay, so making sure that any changes you do, there's measurements in place so that you can measure exactly what your outputs and how your outputs shift. Okay, now you're probably asking yourself, we're at an open source conference, why are we talking about this? Okay, but TeamOps is definitely applicable to open source, right? Because you've got a distributed workforce. In fact, in open source, you don't even know who your workforce may be. Okay, so if you have a single source of truth with a shared reality and a shared context that everybody that works on your project, everybody that finds your project, everybody that reaches your project can understand where the project's going, what decisions are being made, how decisions are being made, and all of the information around that. If you've got that all in one place, it becomes more accessible for people to pick up and adopt your project. Equal contributions, again, open source, everybody can contribute into your project, and helping new contributors understand just how they can contribute and what that means is definitely part of your shared context and your shared reality. Additionally, as your projects grow, you might want to bring in other committers, like we had in the OpenSSL situation, or bringing in other people who may not be part of your core team, but through a merit and through sustained contributions over a long time, you might want to bring other people into the project. That can also then help you maximize decision velocity, because you can start pushing out decisions, or you can say, well, okay, we need 2 approvals to get a review done, but if there's only 3 people to get 2 approvals from, then that kind of sucks. But if there's 23 people to get 2 approvals from, then that helps speed things up a little bit. And then again, how can we monitor that? How do we put some monitoring back into that to understand what does our community look like? How does our community growing? Are we getting new contributors in? Are we getting new contributions in? And how does that work over time? So as I talk through the rest of the slides, kind of think back to this one and see how we can start applying these concepts not just to your open source projects, but in fact to your day-to-day work, because really this is the reality of how we at GitLab work. So the shared reality side of things, in the pre-TeamOps world, you're pretty much optimized to knowledge transfer. How do you, when you bring a new team member in, how do you share that information with them? How do you get them up to speed, get them knowing the way you work and the way you do things? With TeamOps, there's too much information to share. You can't just knowledge dump someone in their first week. Anyone joins a new company, joins a new project or something like that, there's a lot of information. So instead of optimizing for how quickly you can transfer all that information for someone, just for them to forget it because they've just heard another 10 different presentations about other things at the same time, we optimize for retrieval so that everybody starts using that shared source of truth right from the beginning, and we're constantly working through that. Then, in our case, that means handbook first. So the GitLab handbook, you can find on handbook.gitlab.com, is our shared source of truth. It's our reality where we go. We're constantly working on it. You can go and look at the merge requests. There's massive history of merge requests there. Everyone within the organization is actively encouraged to continually working on something. If you do something that's in workflow and it's not in the handbook, then either you're doing things that aren't the right workflow, or you actually need to go and make a change to the handbook. The slides on the right are probably way too small to see, but that's fine. Pretty much, this is kind of just saying along the lines of what I just said. There's a couple of screenshots of what our handbook looks like, and some of the pages in there. I encourage you to go and take a look at that in your own time after the session. So here's a snippet of some stats, again, measurements that we have around our handbook. And you can see that while this is maybe a slightly older snippet, because it's just taking a section of time from, I think that was a year or two ago, you can actually go and see that we've got a number of commits to the handbook in a sustained level over time. And that way we know that this source of truth is active, it's been maintained. It's not just, oh, well, we've got some company docs, they're sitting on a portal somewhere and nobody ever reads them ever again once they've been written. It's very much a living source of information, and it's active, and we're constantly working through it. You can also see over here that in that period of time, there's 374 different authors. So that's not one small team of 10 people or 5 people just actively, keeping the thing running. Everybody's part of it. Everybody's responsible for looking after it. So this comes back to one of those sort of earlier slides. Traditionally, teams share their own time and their location to stay aligned. Okay. In the TeamOps world, you share information to stay aligned. If everybody has the same information that they're working off, then everybody has the same shared context, same shared reality, and therefore everybody can make similar decisions based on the information that they have at hand. So, how do I get started with that? So, go out and build that single source of truth, whether it's a handbook or it's a docs section, or if you've got a open source project that's maybe another project or even a section of documentation within that project, but something that can stay aligned with your project, with your team, with your organization as you grow and as you keep on doing it. Then, additionally to that, make yourself accountable for keeping that up to date. When people make changes to things, say, right, have you updated it in the handbook? Have you updated it in the docs? Make sure that those changes come through. When a open source merge request comes into your project and they've added a small feature and they've added some tests, that they add the docs, right? If we're not constantly bringing everyone back to that same culture of keeping that piece of keeping that single source of truth in check, then we're going to fall out of play there. There's a couple of ways you can kind of see, are we working, are we winning on this? If your single source of truth is used daily and it's updated regularly, then you know that you're kind of probably on the right path there. If your single source of truth was created in one Git commit 5 years ago, edited over the next 3 days by the team as they sort of started putting some stuff together, and it hasn't been touched since, that's probably something to be worried about, because something's changed over the last few years. Certainly not your documentation, though. And again, just are communication styles consistent? Is the whole team working in the same process? If everyone's starting to do different things, or everyone's starting to make different decisions because their contexts are different, maybe go back, check that your single source of truth has the same reality for everyone and is actually documenting the state of play as it is now. Equal contributions helps us, instead of relying on the traditional hierarchies, everybody's allowed to contribute in an equal fashion. What that means is that within the organization, within the project, within the team, everyone's contributions are equally valued. And this is true especially in open source, where you don't know what someone's background is. You don't know if they're if they're new to open source, they're new to your project or anything, but you still value what they have to bring to the table. Again, as long as they're following the guidelines you've set out, as long as they're working from the same source of truth, that the rest of the pieces should be easy to fit into place. Okay, and yeah, there's a bit of a byline here. Time's money. You need a budget, so prioritize your expenses. If your time that you're working with, the time that you're working in your open source project or with your team, is expensive. You've only got so much of it, so prioritize that and figure out how much you can split that out. Okay. In a TeamOps world, we do a lot of things asynchronously. So we value GitLab issues over lots of things. We do public channels as much as possible. Our values say everything open, as you may know if you've ever looked at any of our documentation or our handbooks or our issues or anything. We are pretty much open first. But even internally, when we're doing stuff, when we're discussing things in Slack, it's very much a case of all channels are open by default. If somebody tries to direct message you, most people will generally say, "Hey, can we move this to a public channel, because there's no real need for this to be private or one-on-one. Sometimes there is, but most of the time there's an opportunity to bring it a bit more public first. The constant changes to the documentation with the merge requests and the active conversation that goes around those changes is also a great way of creating that visibility and that shared context. So not just the documentation itself, but the change history around that is all open, is all easily discoverable and easily figure outable. You can also see that you have the right level of participation across all the groups. So traditional teams work in hierarchical dynamics, and that means, right, when somebody says it's your turn to contribute, that's when it's your turn to contribute, or you walk, the old sort of standard like Scrum where everyone kind of goes around the table and says, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm doing. In a TeamOps place, you don't need to do that because everybody knows what everyone's working on because that shared knowledge is already there, that information is already openly shared amongst the team. And TeamOps has a lot more of a dynamic democracy almost, and that's contribute when you need to, not necessarily contribute because it's your turn to contribute. So some people will find that a lot more freeing and a lot more enabling because that means that they will actively contribute even more and more as time goes on. Again, so what does that actually mean? How do I actually like do that? So you need an asynchronous platform, right? Having Teams or Slack or insert chat system here is fine, but that's a little less synchronous than face-to-face or voice calls, but it's still fairly synchronous. So have something where conversations can be recorded, discussions can be recorded, whether that's your issue management or something. Use a platform that is open, that everybody can see. Get your conversations out of those emails. Email is so 1990. Who here loves email? Okay, 3 or 4 of you. That's not too bad. Who here hates email? Yeah, that's a lot more like it. But move those conversations out of email. Like DMs, when someone's DMing you, unless it has to be in a DM for whatever reason, move it out. Encourage people to push back. Culture changes when everyone is responsible for the culture. When you're kind of waiting for somebody else to change the culture, nothing will happen. But if you're all deeply involved in that culture shift and keeping the team, the project, the organization aligned to that culture, then you'll find the culture moves also far more easily. Decision velocity is all about how we can speed up the quantity of decisions that are made. We're not sitting waiting for someone to approve something or something's fired up the chain or whatever. And you push the responsibility and the empowerment of creating those decisions right down into the right levels within the organization. Okay, we do this through the concept of a DRI, a directly responsible individual, and it sort of changes the management style, right? And managers, instead of being the sort of person like telling people what to do or how to do things, the manager then starts to become a lot more of a support role. And the term servant leadership sometimes gets used, where the manager's not there to tell people how to do their job, but is actually just making sure that they have the right tools to do their job. So when you work in this kind of environment, everyone is far more empowered to be autonomous. You're far more empowered. You know what outcomes are necessary. You know what your goals are. Everyone has the same goals, and this is well known because you already have a shared source of truth. So that's where you can start to document your workflows, document other things, and push those decision points down to the place where sometimes a team is able to decide for themselves which platform they want to use or which tool they want to use for their new project or something like that. It doesn't have to go up to a central IT team or something along those lines. But you need to make sure that the right decisions are farmed out to the right parts of the business. And again, as we can have these conversations in asynchronous fashion, We can have these discussions in an issue or something as you're making changes to that single source of truth. So traditional teams work on assignments to fuel motivation and output. So yeah, you can do that. You can do that. That's your job. TeamOps has team goals, and together the team can figure out how to break that up amongst them best and figure out the route to do that. So how do we really drive that piece? So it's creating that self-management and that self-performance standard. So actually encouraging people to be responsible for their own growth, their own direction within a space, making sure everything's documented. Okay, again, back to the single source of truth. Everything goes in there. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Please, go to our handbook and see just how much things are documented at a fairly low level detail. And then there's expectations of people. So make sure that everybody knows what's expected of them. Again, back to that shared context. The same understanding is universal. It's across the board. And make sure that the other expectations, any other expectations you have of people, even if it's an open source project, if you have expectations of a contributor, you want to enforce a certain commit standard or something like that. If you have that in your documentation, you have that in your shared reality, then people understand what it is that is expected of them, and more often than not, they will be able to reach it and achieve it if given the ability to do it themselves. This also builds a feeling of trust, autonomy, and self-motivation, because nobody likes to kind of be standing there under the whip, being told that's what you have to do. Whereas if you feel that you're actually expressing yourself within your boundaries and able to reach your own goals, you get that you get that self-motivation boost. So back to that slide that we saw earlier. You want to have this shared reality, so you need that single source of truth. Whether it's your documentation base of your project, whether it's a handbook for your team or your organization, you need that one place to go where that same base concept is there. Allow for equal contributions by having asynchronous communication, asynchronous conversations, having those conversations in open places where anyone else can contribute if they feel the need to. Maximize that decision velocity by pushing that autonomy down into the teams to allow them to own their own direction. And make sure along the way that you're measuring all of this. So any change to process, if you're not measuring it, you don't know. As I said earlier, you don't know whether it's going to actually speed you up or slow you down. So if you're figuring out how long it takes you to get from idea to a released binary, and you actually know how long that is along the steps, that's great. Now, as soon as you start changing your process at all, as soon as you start changing anything, you can say, hey, hold on a second, we made that change, and now suddenly it's taking us an extra week to get to our release. That's probably not a good change. Sometimes, if you're following a plan, you might need to slow down a little bit to speed up, but that's also okay. But at least if you can watch trends, you can watch things over time, and understand exactly what's happening inside your own numbers. So this is just really a sample of what TeamOps is all about. There is a lot more information. If you are interested, please go check out some more. There is actually a free course you can take. Go back to your office or your work from home space or wherever you are. Share that with your team. Go through it together. Go through it as a group. Share it to your managers. Share it to your senior management. Share it to your best friend who works in another company. Share it because, again, the more people understand how to potentially change how they work, the more chance you have of maybe even realizing that change within your projects, within someone else's project or something. Yeah, that link should work. The QR code's there if you did want to grab it. But yeah, that's pretty much what I had to say, and time for some questions.
Hi, it sounds very good, something we should achieve. It also sounds quite familiar to agile mindset and new work and so. Can you put that a bit in perspective where it is different there, where do this idea belong to?
Absolutely. So it's not different to agile. It's not even in competition to agile or anything along those lines. But where agile is how you build a product, where you've got this transcends that to how you run your entire team, how you run your organization even, at a much more open level playing field. Agile can still keep teams and groups within silos. This breaks down those silos into a much more sort of flatter organization and allows teams to operate still with similar levels of autonomy that Agile allows, but having that shared context means that, hey, now I know what that other team in the cubicle next to us is actually doing. I've spoken to some teams and they sat 3 cubicles away from somebody for 6 years, and until I actually started talking to people and actually getting people to share their context and share what they're doing, they didn't even know what that other guy did 3 cubicles away. And someone actually came to me and said, you know what, thank you for getting us to talk, because it helped us understand what's actually motivating that team, and actually we've got some things in common and we can start sharing additional things between us. So having that single platform also cultivates communication between groups, across the groups, and across the entire organization. And having that will also then help you find other opportunities to find efficiency within the organization.
Thanks for the talk. I have a question. Can you elaborate a little bit more about the autonomy in decision-making, velocity, or optimizing decision-making? Kind of what are the metrics? Because you are also talking about measuring things. So when you know that there is kind of right decision-making, that you are at good level, or where are the bottlenecks?
So I think you can figure out fairly easily whether you know decision-making is probably at the right level. Are people questioning decisions that are made? If people are questioning things, then possibly it's either maybe too low or too high or something. Or if things are taking too long, maybe hitting bottlenecks, maybe something's too far away from the team to actually have the appropriate decisions made. If you effectively, one other way, and kind of goes back to our sort of or within our company values, we have a number of values, but one of them is kind of disagree, commit, disagree. So if somebody voices something or tries to make a certain change that you don't really have too much agreement with, every decision point somewhere around the business has a DRI, that directly responsible individual. That person will kind of take that input in and sometimes change their path, change their tack. But at the end of it, they've been appointed as the person that still owns that decision, for good or worse, for better or worse. So they can then still continue to make that decision, make that change. You can then still disagree afterwards, but at least then you've had that chance to have that discussion, have that chance to open it up. But again, if people tend to disagree with things, or if people are challenging decisions, maybe that decision point isn't being taken at the right spot. But every project is unique, every team is unique, every organization is slightly unique. So finding that sweet spot takes time, maybe, and certainly initially, it probably just takes a little bit of experimentation and iteration, and figuring out exactly where you want to have that decision point configured.
Yeah, thanks for that interesting talk. You mentioned that you constantly measure productivity, and my question is: do you do this on company level, or you do this on team level? Do you benchmark teams?
We don't benchmark teams against one another. We don't benchmark teams. If you're going to start measuring productivity within a team, those measurements are best kept within that team. And I think everyone that kind of hears, oh, I can measure productivity. Yes, you can. Individual teams work differently. And as long as every team is given the autonomy to work appropriately for what they need to do and deliver the results they need to deliver, then you shouldn't be necessarily questioning, well, that team seems to be more productive than that team. Well, again, define productivity there. So measurements can be quite specific. Yes, we can look at features or various things, but one feature might be quite small, another feature might be quite big. So again, you can't even compare features between teams, especially in our case, we've got several teams across the business running, all working against the same product. But in your case, you might have 20 products or 100,000 products. So you can't benchmark the teams directly against one another. But as long as you understand within a team that if certain decisions are being made, you can actually see, well, this has sped our team up or this has slowed our team down. And then you can adjust and iterate from there.
Not measuring output against outcome, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. You mentioned something that confused me. You said if you make the decision and people question, or you want to make a decision and people question things, you're at the wrong level of doing things.
So, not that. No, I'm saying if decisions are being made, and people tend to be questioning them after the fact and saying, well, why was that decision made or anything like that? Then that decision, that DRI individual is maybe too low in the stack. So it's about finding the sort of sweet spot for who is that DRI and why is that DRI? And of course, you can't have one person as the DRI for half the organization either. You have to spread that load out because otherwise all decisions will get backed up behind that one person. But again, it's one of those things that you almost sort of will develop a feel for over time.
Yeah, the key thing was it's only later, once a decision was already made, then suddenly there's pushback and people figure out that was a bad decision. It sounded to me somehow you need to make a decision where everyone is just nodding their heads, and that would be the exactly wrong.
No, you don't want that. So absolutely, you want people to discuss and have input before the fact, because that's part of being able to contribute, right? So you want to make sure that everybody gets that opportunity to have their say ahead of time. And if you go into some sort of closer detail in some of the slides which I shared, but even in some of our decision-making history internally, you can actually see where CEOs made a decision to maybe make a change. I think one of the ones that was in the slides there was several years ago. Sid, our CEO, made a merge request on the handbook and say, let's call, instead of calling team members, let's call us Tanukis. And there was a lot of discussion on the merge request, and eventually it was like, right, okay, we hear you, let's not do that. And the merge request was closed and nothing further done. So decisions can be made, but everybody should have a voice in that to the right level. But at the end of it, the DRI is still responsible for making that decision whether to go ahead with it or not.
Okay, thank you for your talk. I have a question about the right level of granularity for having a handbook. Obviously, your company size is like a bit more than 2,000 employees. What is the kind of the feedback of the community of TeamOps about bigger companies like the one I'm coming from? It's like 120,000. Would you say like it's possible to have one handbook entry point where you say that's a company handbook, or would you split it up to smaller one? And if it's split up in smaller one, how will you kind of cross-references that silo do not exist anymore, or less existing?
That's a great question. I don't actually have any data around what sort of larger companies are saying about it. The way I would probably approach it is that even within our own handbook, we have not quite silos, but we have sections that are looked after by certain teams, and they look after their content within there, and their content might be formatted differently to other teams, or exactly how they load things, because again, they own that section within there. So if I were trying to approach it at a large organization level, again, if you've got buy-in from the large organization to start doing this, that's a fantastic place to start. Alternatively, I'd probably start at the level at which you can get the right level of agreement and buy-in, and start building it there. As other teams come online, you might get a case where you get 2 or 3 handbooks across the organization, and this is Division A, Division B, Division C. At some point then, if you build up enough mass, then you probably do need to like even look at a project to merge them somehow, or even just merge them into sort of one like container project that maybe just hosts sub-projects within it or something along those lines. But again, your organization will probably feel slightly different to another organization, so exactly how you go about it is less relevant than the fact that the important part is that you have that shared context, you have that single source of truth at a level that is appropriate. So yes, it would be great to get a shared handbook for 120,000 people, but as you can probably guess, and I would imagine that would be pretty difficult to sort of handle and maintain.
A follow-up question is, do you do statistic about which page are read and review from time to time to improve these which are not read? Like, if you imagine that a handbook as yours is pretty big, some things are maybe still outdated. That's what you presented at some slide. Do you have like a mechanism to kind of
So we do.
identify?
I have seen some metrics. I don't know who does that. I think we do actually have a team, and they are the DRI for the handbook. So they probably look at these things, and there is projects every now and then to go and clean things up or migrate things or play around in the code. So these things do happen from time to time. And again, it is also up to each team to make sure that they are keeping their own sort of corner of the handbook up to date.
Hi. The handbook for GitLab, or the handbook of GitLab, is quite big. So there are a lot of things to read and to understand and to consume. So I was wondering, what are the best practices of onboarding the handbook to the people? Because one cannot just read the whole handbook, otherwise it will, or he or she will spend a month reading.
So one of those earlier slides, I spoke about optimizing for knowledge retrieval rather than transfer. So part of our onboarding process, everybody gets an issue with a number of sort of checkboxes. Go and look at this section of the handbook. Go and look at this section of the handbook, and then even then, it's not go and look at the whole thing. But you spend a bit of time when you're onboarding at GitLab, looking at the values and looking at some of the more general company sections of the handbook. And then different teams will also say, right, now go and look at our section of the handbook and look at different pieces. But at the same time, it's also spread out over several days. There's a big knowledge dump. You're joining any new organization, any new project. There's a lot of information to pick up. But even then, I haven't read the whole handbook. Very few people have read the whole GitLab handbook. But again, as long as you're making it easy to navigate and find what you need to find. So if you need to find something, make sure there's a good search system in there so you can search properly and things come up quickly or something, so that anyone who is looking for the information can find it quickly and find it easily.